So the first thing we're going to look at is from biography.com. It's entitled 10 Iconic Wild West Figures. These famous outlaws ruled the American frontier by Hickok. So in the 1860s and the 1890s, gave birth to the period known as the Wild West and laid a foundation for its ensuing mythology. It was an era of cowboys, Indians, pioneers, outlaws, gunslingers, brought together by the purpose of expansion, defense, greed, and reinvention. So we're going to explore some of these legendary outlaws from the Old West. And our first one is very well known, Billy the Kid. While not much is known of Billy the Kid's early years, he was born William Henry McCarty Jr. in the slums of New York City and was orphaned at the age of 14. He eventually moved out west, where his days as a Wild West outlaw and gunfighter was ripe before him. On the lam from New Mexican authorities for stealing, Billy the Kid fled to Arizona, where he murdered a man during a fight. He returned to New Mexico and joined a group of cattle thieves and fought in the Lincoln County War. Although he boasted of having gunned down close to 24 men, he probably killed less than 10 before he was fatally shot at the age of 21 by Sheriff Pat Garrett. Next is Buffalo Bill. William F. Buffalo Bill Cody lived many lives before he became known to the world for his famous Wild West tour. Barely a teen, he took part in California's gold rush, and 2 years later became a Pony Express rider. He served as an Army scout in the Indian Wars, fought for the Union in the Civil War, and found a way of practicing his acting in between. By the time he launched his colorful cowboy-themed Wild West show in 1883, he was already a legend. Our next person is Davy Crockett. Easily identifiable by his coonskin cap, so that's a hat made out of an animal called a raccoon. Had a long black and brown and white tail. Very popular in the 50s. All the young boys had a coonskin cap. Davy Crockett was known for being a hunter, frontiersman, soldier, and politician. Is one of the most mythologized folk heroes and forefathers of the Wild West. Called King of the Wild Frontier, Davy Crockett got involved in Tennessee's local and state politics before representing it as a U.S. congressman in 1827 to 1833. After barely losing his election to serve out a fourth term, a disillusioned Crockett moved to Texas, which was under Mexico's jurisdiction at the time. In 1835, the following year, he fought for Texas independence and was killed in the Battle of the Alamo. Our next person, a woman frontiers lady called Calamity Jane. She was born Martha Jane Canary in Missouri Calamity Jane grew up to be an adventurous frontiersman and performer. Famous for dressing and shooting like a man and drinking like one too. Jane moved to booming gold rush towns out west and became an expedition scout in South Dakota. She became famous for her wild antics and quickly learned that telling tall tales of her exploits, real and mostly imagined, could help her make money. Jane toured with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show and also appeared at the 1901 Pan American Exposition in upstate New York. Her rumored romantic relations with Wild Bill Hickok were probably started by her, but soon, even she tired of her fanciful stories and persona. Suffering from alcoholism, Jane died at age 51. Per her request, she was buried next to Hickok. So that leads us to Wild Bill Hickok. Like Calamity Jane, Wild Bill Hickok was known for telling outlandish tales about his adventures out west. He was a wagon master, Union spy, lawman, gunslinger, and gambler who became cemented as one of the most famous folk heroes of the era, thanks to his quick-draw duel with Davis Tutt in 1865. While playing a game of poker in Deadwood, Dakota territory, Hickok was shot in the back by Jack McCall. At the time of his death, he was purportedly holding 2 pairs of black aces and eights, now known as the dead man's hand in poker. Annie Oakley, called Miss Sure Shot, among many other names. Ohio native Annie Oakley lived an extraordinary life thanks to her champion shooting skills, which started in her teens. At 15, her talents came out in full view when she dared to compete with expert marksman Frank E. Butler, whom she narrowly beat in a shooting contest and eventually married. Later, she'd meet Buffalo Bill, become one of his star attractions in his Wild West show, where she had the opportunity to meet royalty, world leaders, and even befriend Chief Sitting Bull. Even up to her death, Oakley was setting records in shooting contests and preparing for a comeback. She died in 1926. Her husband of 5 decades was so devastated that he followed her to the grave just a few weeks later. Butch Cassidy. Robert Leroy Parker, better known as Butch Cassidy, closed out the last decade of the 1800s being a wanted man. With his accomplice, Harry Alonzo Lagorba, also known as Sundance Kid, the two robbed trains, banks, and led a posse of criminals called the Wild Bunch. Cassidy and the Wild Bunch wreaked havoc in places like Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico before fleeing the country to invade law enforcement. To make a clean escape, Cassidy and the Sundance Kid traveled from New York City to South America. In 1908, they got involved in a shootout with local authorities in the country of Bolivia, and it is believed that the two men lost their lives there. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is a famous Western movie, and we have a short clip of that. You can find that in the description box below or in the email I sent you. Okay, next is an outlaw named Jesse James. Like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, Jesse James was another celebrated bank and train robber who, along with his brother Frank, led the James Younger Gang. The James brothers fought for the Confederate Army during the Civil War and were accused of atrocious crimes against Union soldiers and abolitionists. Robbing banks, trains, and stagecoaches throughout the Midwest, James gained celebrity status and notoriety, starting in 1866. After close to 2 decades on the run, James's life of crime came to an end when he was shot by new gang recruit Robert Ford, who was promised by authorities to be forgiven for his past crimes if he killed James. Next is Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp was a complicated frontiersman who lived many lives, both savory and unsavory. Not only was he a businessman, brothel bouncer, and gambler, but he had a few run-ins with the law before deciding to become the law. After moving from one boomtown to the next in search of easy money, he found himself in Dodge City, Kansas, as an assistant marshal, where he would spend his days maintaining the peace and doing his fair share of gambling. In 1879, he and several of his brothers moved to Tombstone, Arizona territory, hoping to get rich from the silver boom. While there, they found trouble waiting for them. A group of outlaws called the Cowboys. Soon the Earp brothers, along with friend Doc Holliday, would become legendary for their shootout with the Cowboys at the OK Corral in 1881. Doc Holliday. John Henry Doc Holliday was born and raised in Georgia before he became a professional gambler and gunslinger out west. He became a dentist who built his career in Atlanta, Georgia. Having caught tuberculosis from his ailing mother, Holliday decided to move to the Southwest in hopes that the drier climate would ease his symptoms. Like Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday was a drifter and risk-taker. Realizing playing poker was more lucrative than dentistry, he became a gambler and traveled westward. Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was in Texas he met Wyatt Earp, and the two became lifelong friends. Holliday would eventually follow Earp to Tombstone, Arizona, and fight side by side with him at the OK Corral. At age 36, Doc Holliday succumbed to tuberculosis in California.